Chapter 20 Farewells. There was no time for Kendra's shock. Her companions were rushing forward to the shade of the old oak, kneeling around Boris's crumpled form. Caleb stopped short, watching cautiously, but the woman passed him by. Maya and Medusa both seemed a little uncertain at his side. Some corner of Kendra's mind reflected that they likely hadn't needed to properly care for anyone in a long time. In spite of the frantic beat of her heart, Kendra checked him over, scanning for injuries. He had the look of one living rough for some time. His clothes, the same that she'd last seen him in if she was not mistaken, were ripped and mud-covered. An ugly bruise was laid across his forehead, and he was sweating profusely. But he was breathing. "I don't see any obvious injuries beside the blow to the head," she said pensively. "We need to get him some food and water, and... Medusa, could I impose on you further? He needs to get indoors, and preferably under some blankets, at least for a little while. Could we take him back to your cottage?" "Of course, Kendra dear, of course," she replied hastily, nodding and making to stand. "Thank you. All right, everyone, take a—" "Just a moment," Caleb said firmly. "This isn't the Moira you're looking for, I take it. Do you even know this man, Kendra? Altruism is all well and good, but still, I'd just as soon not stick our noses into matters we don't understand. We've got troubles enough of our own." "Caleb, please," Kendra said angrily, but the elf's expression did not change. "Putting aside the fact that I'm not about to leave an injured man lying on the ground, yes, as it happens, I do know him." Maya flinched, and Kendra's curiosity nearly bubbled over, but she went on. "He was a friend of mine as well. He was very kind to me back when I was starting out on my own. Now please, come here and help me with him." Caleb shrugged his acceptance, and together they coordinated picking him up. He was stocky and heavy for his weight. They were lifting him when something caught Kendra's eye, long and silver, and just as familiar as Boris. He must have rolled over onto it, for there, clear as daylight, was Moira's beautiful rapier. Its hilt still gleamed, even with its sheath muddied and battered, the small and ferocious bit of ostentation the serious woman had allowed herself. Kendra bid her party to wait, and reached down for it. She lurched back with a cry, her hands stinging. Examining herself and flexing her fingers, they seemed unhurt, though there was a dull ache where she had touched the hilt. Looking back to where the sword lay, Kendra fancied that it almost had a twinkle of malevolence. "That's forged steel, Kendra," Caleb said significantly, giving the blade a wary look. "Something you'll have to get used to, I'm afraid." His words carried a strange feeling she could not fully explain. In a very real and tangible way, her humanity was slipping away. It carried a melancholy taste, and with no small amount of fear, but there was also something else, almost a thrill of anticipation. She shook herself, and took the sword gingerly by the sheath, tucking it into her belt. They made their way quickly back to the rose garden by Medusa's sure guidance. Boris moaned and muttered incomprehensibly, but he did not awaken. His face, she noticed now, seemed badly sunburnt red. With her free arm, Maya leaned her mushroom parasol in to cover the both of them. "He's resting now," Kendra half whispered, quietly closing the door behind her. She had been with him for some time, cleaning him and salving his burns. "I don't think he's going to wake up for a while yet. He needs time to heal and recover. Whatever happened, he's been through the ringer." She pursed her lips anxiously, but pressed on. "So, now we need to discuss. What next?" "He can stay here as long as he needs to," Medusa offered quickly. "You can all stay while he gets better. It's no trouble, really." She had been playing hostess with great enthusiasm, pressing a sandwich brimming with the fruits of her garden into Kendra's hands. She nodded her thanks and chewed thoughtfully. The excitement of the morning had left her ravenously hungry. "Lovely, thank you," Kendra mumbled through the crumbs. After an ungainly swallow, she sighed. "I don't think that's possible, Medusa. He had Moira's sword. If I know her, she left him with a weapon to defend himself when he was hurt. Or to finish himself off if something found him," she reflected grimly. "I don't think he was there for long, and that means that Moira is likely still close, unarmed, and probably in trouble. So while I'd like to stay, Medusa, time is of the essence." The veiled woman nodded dejectedly. "Time is of the essence if she's alive," Caleb interjected. "You're assuming you heard her call out, and you're assuming that this Boris character hasn't been just carrying her sword since the attack on the caravan. We don't know anything for certain." "I doubt he's been lugging that weapon all this way, Caleb," Maya commented quietly from her corner. She appeared to be lost in some ponderance, as statue-still as when they'd first found her. "It would be hard going for a dwarf to bring all that iron all this way on his person." At Medusa's insistence, the sword had been left outside the cottage. Caleb frowned. "He's a dwarf?" he asked, bemused. "Kendra, I thought you knew him." "I do," Kendra confirmed, looking searchingly at Maya. "Well, I thought I knew him. But then, I didn't know he was a dwarf until I examined his wounds, so maybe I didn't understand him as well as I thought." It was a painful admission, a realization she had been turning over and over in her mind. Memories that had been such a comfort now had a strange cast over them, a shadow of uncertainty. "It sounds like he's a liar," Maya said, and Kendra flinched. There was a cold bitterness she was unaccustomed to in the dwarf's voice. "You trusted him, and he didn't tell you a damn thing. It sounds like he didn't particularly want to be understood." Silence spread between them, and still Maya sat, her distant gaze set on something known only to her. Medusa dithered and fussed before taking Maya's hand comfortingly. "The details of this man's history are of no real importance right now," Medusa said, hurriedly trying to change the subject. "I'll look after him. By the looks of him, he'll still be here after you find this other friend of yours. You can collect him when that's all said and done, and talk everything out. There's no reason you can't all stay a while to recover altogether." Her tone was distinctly hopeful, and a pang of pity pulled sharply at Kendra's heart. "I don't know if we're going to be coming back this way, Medusa," she admitted softly. "We've still got a lot of our journey ahead of us, and enemies at our heels. If we stay much longer, I don't know if you and Boris would be safe, let alone if we come back later." A faint hissing filled the air, and the veil was momentarily turbulent and writhing. Then, as quickly as it arose, it settled, and Medusa nodded smallly. "I understand. Regardless, I will look after this Boris of yours, even if this is to be our parting. Where should I direct him to, if he wants to seek you out after he's recovered?" "We're going south," Kendra said, envisioning the rough map she had slowly been piecing together from the book. "I don't know how far off course we might have to go to find Moira, but once that's settled, we still have to make our way south as quickly as possible. The citadels of the sisters are actually quite close now, but it's hard to say. Miss Medusa?" Kendra paused from her review. Across from her, the veiled lady had gone tense, her hands visibly trembling. "What's wrong?" "You're going to the citadels?" she asked. Kendra blinked in surprise. Medusa's voice rang hollow like a bell, a haunted echo of some old horror. "By the gods, Kendra, Why? What do you want with the sisters?" "I don't understand," Kendra said, her brow furrowed in concern. She went to Medusa's side, assuming as soft an expression and tone as she could. The woman seemed on the brink of panic. "What's wrong with that? I know the journey carries some risks, but I've never heard anyone here in the garden say anything ill of the sisters." "The sisters," Caleb said solemnly, "are benefactors and saviors. They performed what is likely the greatest act of good in living memory. They gave safe harbor to thousands on the run who would have certainly been slaughtered by the human armies. Many ancient Fey races were saved from extinction. For being allowed to stay in their realm, we owe the sisters everything. But that doesn't make them any less dangerous. They are old beyond reckoning, and their agendas and attitudes are, well, almost unknowable. I did tell you, it's damn near suicide to attempt it. Their towers are strong and well guarded by means we can scarcely imagine, and that's not even taking into account what they'll do to us if we do meet them face to face." There was a sinking feeling in the pit of Kendra's stomach. It felt like the weight of looming and inevitable judgment. She swallowed. "Miss Medusa, you had an audience with the sisters," she said a little desperately. "You told me that they helped you. It's not as bad as all that, surely?" Medusa laughed, a sibilant undercurrent to the sound. "I am grateful for the gift that was given to me, Kendra," she said bleakly. "I was fortunate, much more so than many. But when it comes to the sisters, nothing is simple. Magic carries a cost, always, and they wield powerful magics indeed. A gift from them is both a great blessing and a curse. I knew that when I decided to go to them. When I went to them, it was because I had decided that I could accept death or worse as a very real possibility if I failed. It is a refuge of the hopeless, a last resort." Kendra found herself feeling the long ears atop her head, still so alien and unexpected. It had been a strange road that had brought her here, she reflected. Even now, she could see the hair, bloodied and dying. She could see Adrian, weeping on the ground where she found him. She shook her head. "I have to do this, Miss Medusa," she said quietly. "I've made terrible mistakes, and I at least have to try to make up for it. I owe a lot of people, a lot of friends." "If they were your friends," Medusa replied, "then they would want what is best for you, Kendra. They don't want you to suffer." Her voice had calmed greatly. It was steady now, measured and sad. "I'm sorry," she said again. We really do have to go now. There's not much time." Around the room, Maya and Caleb rose with her. Medusa sighed and nodded. She went to Kendra and embraced her. "I wish you well, Kendra dear, wherever your road takes you. You have some good friends with you. I am most envious. You must remember to treasure them." She paused briefly, looking over to Maya. "Please let them take care of you too, at least a little bit," she said in a parting whisper. "Are you all right, Maya? You've been very quiet since we left." They were sitting beneath the tree where Boris had been found some hour past. It was there that they last had sign of the caravan mistress, there that they had found her sword. The three of them had all set to searching under the undergrowth, but in short order Caleb had waved Kendra and Maya off irritably, disappearing amid mutters of spoiling trails. He had gone, crouched low to the ground, his eyes sweeping back and forth for some sign known only to him, a wolf on a scent. I'm peachy, Kendra, just fine, she said, twirling her parasol absently. The casual tone she was accustomed to had returned, but Maya seemed remote somehow, and she offered no more. You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, of course, Kendra said nervously. I don't mean to pry. You can ask me anything, Kendra, anything at all. The content of the words was comforting, but Maya seemed no less distant. She was looking sightlessly away to the northern horizon. The storm was drawing close again, choking and utterly enormous. The domed roof of the black house was now entirely eclipsed. She felt a burning question rise to her throat and falter. You certainly hit it off with our hostess, Kendra said after a moment, changing course abruptly. Maya twitched, seemingly startled from her faraway considerations. She seemed quite taken with you, Kendra went on, more confident now. You must have made quite the impression. Maya sighed, an unwilling smile quirking at her lips. Well, I didn't do much of anything. She'd just been alone a long time. It feels good to be seen, well, so to speak, to know that you haven't been forgotten entirely. Given her, condition, I suppose no one's seen her properly in a long time. It's a feeling I can certainly appreciate. Well, that's one half of it, sure, Kendra said, a knowing and juvenile smirk pulling raggedly into her cheek. Of course she liked you. You were quite charming back there, swooping in all gallant like some hero out of a fable. One could be forgiven for thinking you enjoyed it. I was only doing what was proper and decent, Maya said, her cool cracking ever so slightly. She needed a minute to just let it out, and I've got a patient ear. It wasn't anything so special. Oh, I see. Kendra nodded her exaggerated understanding. You would have done that for anyone. You don't particularly like her or anything like that. Maya's face was only flustered for a moment before she assumed a suitable scowl. Well, now, I didn't say all that. I like her well enough. She's a nice sort of lady. It's natural that I'd think well of her. I mean to say we've got a little in common, and she's, a real classy type. It's just easy to have a conversation with her, is all I mean. You have a lot in common? Kendra asked, now grinning openly. It sounds like you had quite the talk while I was away. What, might I ask, do you have in common? Well, this and that, Maya began truculently. She's not as fancy as she seems, Well, I mean, yes, she is, but she also enjoys her simple pleasures. She tends to that big old rose garden of hers all on her lonesome. Must be a hell of a lot of work, but she keeps at it. It's a certain type of person that takes joy in caring for little greenlings, keeping them growing straight and all. It reminds me of home somehow, tending to the mushrooms. I told her a little about where I came from, and I expected that she'd be put off, fungi and bottom feeders and all. Dwarves have a bit of an unpleasant reputation among some. But Dusa, she took it all in stride. Dusa? Kendra asked innocently. She giggled as she watched Maya blanch and then go red. It was a strange sensation, light and childish in a way she could hardly remember feeling. She felt it go on, uncontrollable, and soon Maya was giggling with her. They sat beneath the ancient oak, watching the shadow of the storm rolling over them like a calamitous wave, and laughed until they were empty. So how about it? Kendra wiped a tear from her eye as the fit ran its course, still coming in faint snorts here and there. When it's all over, when we get it all sorted out and we can stop running, will you come back here? Look her up? I mean, she likes you and you like her. It could be nice. You're making some mightily large assumptions, Kendra. There was a melancholy look on Maya's face. Not sadness, but a resignation. Who's to say how long this takes, or if any of us is going to come back from it? The things that look so shiny and hopeful today, Kendra, these people, these futures, it's all just conjectural, a seed and a hope. Maybe it'll grow into something, but oftentimes not, and it can all turn to ash the second you blink. Kendra watched her, her brow furrowed. She swallowed and took the plunge. This is about Boris, isn't it? The parasol fell out of its mesmerizing spin as Maya froze in that statue-still manner of hers. It isn't about anything anymore, she said finally, and in that moment she looked as ancient as Kendra knew her to be. I just can't keep tripping around and getting tangled up in people. You're too young to realize it yet, but people aren't solid, Kendra. They aren't forever. If you depend on someone to be there, then eventually you'll learn that the hard way. Things always change, Maya, Kendra replied quietly. It's just a part of life. Not letting yourself get close to anyone because you're afraid of changes is no way to live. Live for today is all right for a human, Maya said, surprisingly biting. But given recent events, you might need to revise that attitude. Choices and changes mean something different when you have to live with them for eternity. Tell me again in 100 years that I shouldn't worry about the consequences, that I should think with my heart. They sat in pained silence for a while before Maya snorted. Besides, she said, deliberately light now, I have time to think on it. No need to make any choices just yet. She pulled Kendra into a close bear hug, grinning fiercely. How about it, Miss Kendra? How are you doing with all these changes? You've been through a lot lately. Oh, I'm all right, Kendra said, smiling reluctantly. Now how can that be? Maya asked seriously. I've known you for all of a day, and in that time you had your guts torn out and pulled back together, not to put too fine a point on it. Yesterday you didn't have these. She patted Kendra's head between those two long protrusions. Kendra did not answer for a time, fiddling with the tips of her long ears. It was all moving so quickly, she had not stopped to consider that she hardly knew what she was any more. The Kendra of a month ago would hardly have recognized that girl with inhuman ears, her dirty and bloodied clothes, an ornate sword slung at her side. Well, that was partly true. No matter what, she would have certainly known this face. Kendra swallowed. I can't think about it right now, she finally muttered, feeling her throat tense. It would slow me down, and there's too much to do for me to allow that. I can't let myself be weak now, she thought to herself, her jaw setting resolutely. Maya said nothing. They sat there, close together beneath her parasol, watching the darkness of the storm roll over them. Soon Caleb emerged from the brush. I picked up the trail, he crowed. No mean feat, might I add. She was covering her tracks pretty well, for a human, but I'm better. The trail's only a few hours old, going south. Kendra let out a long breath, focusing herself. Then she stood, and with effort smiled. Thank you, Caleb. She could feel the aching cold of the blade hanging at her hip, strident and imperious, as if calling out to its mistress. She would return it to her. She owed Moira that much. Lead the way,